You'll probably want to, maybe jot down some notes. Please, please, please ask questions along the way. I might forget to cover things otherwise, so please do that. Okay, so this next project is called Address Book. Like I said last class, I am very creative with names. It's a very awesome name. It's the best name. So the idea here is we're going to build upon what we did in Trial Calculator. No big surprise, we have a bunch of fields here, so that should be immediately familiar. But what we're going to do here is we're going to enter some data. We're going to store it in the browser local storage. Okay, so it's going to have some persistence, and we have a number of operations that we can do to it. So we don't just have one thing. We don't just have one calculate button. We have a bunch of things we can do. Display, delete, download, upload. So we can download a data file containing all of our address book data, and we can upload a JSON file, JavaScript object notation data file containing all of our address book data. Okay. Let's see. So I'm going to actually, because I have some kind of an error in here, I'm going to actually show you the one I have from last semester. It just looks slightly different. So, okay. So if I add a contact, it looks something like this. I can add a new contact here, and there's some error checking. So it highlights the field I'm on, of course, but if I type in just a letter instead of a full name, it highlights that box in red right away. So I'll cover how that works, but I'll just type in Steve Jobs again. That's fine. I can spell it wrong, it doesn't care. If I just type in gibberish here, it's going to flag that as being wrong. For mailing address, I actually have to fill in, so this is UWGB's address, but like I can put in an address, but not like just a partial address. I have to put in the whole thing here. Yours does not have to function this way. So I have to actually put in a big, long, complicated address there. Phone number, similarly, I have to put in the right syntax for the phone number. If I put in a +1 like that, it's not gonna validate. So I'm not using very sophisticated validation for those. Email, because it's using the built-in browser email checking, which I'll show you, it's going to pick that up fine. And then the birth date. Okay. So, and then I can grab a photo. So we're using a file upload field, and I'm limiting it to images only. So it's hiding all these spreadsheet files and all this other nonsense that I have. So I'm just going to upload a JPEG. I got to find a JPEG though. I guess I'll just use that space one again. And then I'll click on add this contact, and it adds it to my address book, and then I have to hit display again to have it actually update in this case. Okay. I could have had it update the display, but I chose not to in this case. Okay. So these are different. This is two different people there, right? So there are two items in my address book. This is using object-oriented programming, which I will get into. Okay, don't be afraid of that. It's an array of contacts. That's the kind of the structure of it. So this is a contact with some properties, name, address, phone number, email address, birth date, photo, and it's an array of those. And then I can perform these various operations on the address book, so I can display it, so that's being displayed. I can hit delete, and it will give me a warning that says it's going to completely delete my address book. I can download it, and if I hit download, it's going to download addressbook.json, and I think I already have that open. Yep. So it looks something like this. So it has name, Steve Jobs, address. So this is JavaScript object notation, which is actually a very standard file format now across programming languages, but obviously JS is in the name, so it started out with JavaScript, and this is a JavaScript object as a text file, so it's just portable to other languages, and it's just a good structure for moving data back and forth, okay? You don't have to know what it looks like at all to use it. In fact, like, you don't ever have to open yours up at all, but that's what it looks like if you're curious. And I could upload, so I can actually, I'll delete this first. So I'll delete, I'll hit display again, I'll even hit refresh. Like, this is completely gone, right? So now I'll upload that address book. And it will, gives me a warning that it's going to overwrite whatever's there. I could have had a check to see if there actually was anything there. I didn't do that. And so I actually uploaded my old one. So this is even more so. This is not the one that I just downloaded. This is the previous one. Okay. So any overarching questions about any of that? Okay. So to get a 10 out of 10, you'll need to have all those operations working and all that stuff. You can have whatever fields you want, but it should be an address book. It should have photos, and it can look however you want, but those things should all function. Okay. And I'll give you, I'll point out some of the code I'll for sure give you, because it's really just, it is what it is. There's no reason not to give it to you. But then you're gonna write as much of the rest of it as possible. So let's look at the HTML. So hide this. So the starting at the top, this is identical to Travel Calculator, other than it says address book. Even this stuff, identical. We're using 2 columns instead of 3 columns, and the first column is skinnier than the right column, so it's 4 and 8, so not 6 and 6. I also added a bunch of other classes, so I had a little bit of a margin at the top with this MT2, added a little background on this version here, added a border, so that's just what this other stuff is. You can use those things or not. Those are just things that are built into Bootstrap. I'm wrapping all of the form elements into a form tag, mostly so that I can use the built-in JavaScript reset, the built-in browser reset function, to clear it out. So when I add an item into the address book, these all clear out with just one function call. Okay. So I'm taking advantage of that by just making this a form, okay? Instead of just having the fields be just in there loose. Okay. Any questions so far? Stop me if I say anything crazy. So the phantom text that's sitting there, so you see Steve Jobs here, UWGB's address. This text here that disappears when I start typing, that's called placeholder text. You can get at that by adding this placeholder attribute to your input fields, so that's pretty cool. And then the error checking that's done in the browser, it's really rudimentary. It doesn't happen in every browser, and what each browser does with it is sort of up to the browser. But we're doing that with regular expressions, and we do that with this pattern attribute. So has anybody used regular expressions before? So one thing that I always try to say is, like, if you don't ever do anything else with computer science, if you walk away and you have an understanding of regular expressions, that is a superpower. It's huge. So even in the Atom text editor, you can do regular expression search and replace. I don't know if I actually don't think you can do it in Microsoft Word, but most other word processors, you can do regular expression search and replace. You can do you can do regular expression search and replace, or regular expression searching or matching in almost all programming languages. Java, JavaScript, there are C++ libraries, PHP, almost everything, right? So what are regular expressions? They're just pattern matching. It's a pattern matching language for matching strings of characters. Okay, so this one in particular, this is a really simple one, even if it doesn't look simple. The caret just means the beginning of the string. The $ here just means the end. The \S means any non-space character. So anything that's not a space, a carriage return, or a tab, basically. Okay. So, which really just means spaces in this case, right? So, so it means any non-space character, and the plus means at least one of those. So, a valid name in this case would be 1 space 2. Okay, it highlights that in green. But if I go 1 space 2 space 3, that's not. Okay. So obviously that's not probably a valid name, but in this case, you know, this is just a really basic check, right? So going on in here, a lowercase s means a space. So one or more non-spaces followed by one or more spaces followed by one or more non-spaces. That's a full name, first name, last name. Okay. So this won't allow for middle initials, anything like that. That'll throw an error. So this is not the best, but this is a really basic regular expression. Okay. So I'm going to flip over to this. So on regxr.com is a site where you can plug in all these different regular expression. There's a little cheat sheet here that shows you all the different things you can type in here, and you can punch in, like I typed in Steve Jobs here, and you can type in what you want to try as your regular expression. So like if I did caret and then I did \S plus, and it highlights as you go, right? So if I just did a capital S, it just grabs the first character, then I do a plus, and then I do \, lowercase s, it grabs the space, but I'm going to allow for multiple spaces because why not? \capital S, it grabs the J, and then the whole thing with the plus, and then I'm just going to close it out with the $ just to make sure I'm testing the whole string. Okay, so that's the regular expression that would match like this. Okay. So, any questions about that so far?
How would we put a restriction on numbers so they can't put a number in there?
So they can't put a number. Great. So. So that would be a W, right? So we could do a /W. So that matches Steve Jobs. But if I have 1, 2, well, maybe not. Let's see, word, digit. So does word fit? So the other thing you can do is what are called character classes. So, because this W must allow for numbers as well. So you can do character classes. So you can go A through Z, character class plus. Okay. So you put them in square brackets, and that allows you, it'll say match any of these. So capital A through capital Z and lowercase a through lowercase z. Okay. So it'll match any of those characters. So if I do Steve Jobs here, and then \S, A through Z, okay. So that'll match that. And it won't match numbers. So if I did 1 space 2, it won't match that. Okay. That's a great question, yeah. Yeah?
What's the site called again?
What's what?
What's the site?
Oh, this site is regxr.com. regexr.com. I'll try to remember to put it in Canvas. Yeah. Yeah, and like I pointed out, the regular expressions can get crazy. So if you had to do one for email, this is the way to test for a valid email address. Okay. Yeah. So Thankfully, that's built into your browser, so you don't have to do that. Okay. But so moving onward. So and I said you don't have to do yours this way. Okay. So you can enter your fields really any way you want. I don't care. Okay. Should be an address book. Okay. Like with people and a photo maybe, but like whatever fields you want to put in here. Okay. So this would not be the best user experience. Making somebody type in an address followed by exactly a comma, followed by exactly a space, followed by the city, followed by exactly a comma, followed by exactly a space, followed by exactly a 2-character state, followed by a space, followed by a 5-digit zip code, because there's lots of things that would break that. Okay. For instance, what if there's an apartment number and you want to have an additional comma in there or whatever, right? But this is just to outline like what a little more complicated regular expression would look like. Okay, so this regular expression matches this. Okay, this will allow something that looks like this. So the caret in this case means not comma. Okay, so the caret in this context means the beginning of the line. Inside these square brackets, it means not what follows. So I know that's a little confusing, but so this means anything that's not a comma, at least one of those. So that matches all of this, is this right here, followed by exactly 1 comma, followed by 0 or more spaces. So you don't have to put a space here. You could put Green Bay right up against there. Followed by anything that's not a comma, followed by a comma, followed by 0 or more spaces, followed by 2-character state. So that's that A through Z. So, and this curly braces 2 means exactly 2 of those. So I'm not saying any number or 0 or more or 1 or more. I'm saying exactly 2. Followed by 1 or more spaces, followed by exactly 5 digits. Okay. So that's that. Phone number is very similar. Exactly the digits 2 through 9 because you can't start with a 1. And email, I just have to say type equals email. So whereas all these other ones are, well, this one is type equals telephone. And the reason for that is if you're on a mobile device, it'll pop up the keypad in many cases. So that's a bonus. Not all phones will do that, but like most should do that now. And email will potentially do something on your phone too. It could potentially open up your address book. It's the browser can do what it wants to do with this, but at the very least, it shouldn't allow for malformed email addresses. Okay, so you don't have to give it a pattern for that. Birth date, I'm entering it in exactly this format. You don't have to do it that way. You could have separate fields for the month, day, and year if you want to. That's probably a better user experience for error checking. Up to you though. So the cool stuff though is the photo upload. So the way we do that is with a type equals file input field. So you can input files into your JavaScript and save them into your permanent storage, which is pretty awesome. Okay, and all we really have to do is I'm giving it this array name, and I'm giving it an array name so that because we could be uploading multiple files. So when you have a file selector in Windows or Mac, you can upload multiple files. Okay, we're only going to use the first one, but you could be uploading more than one. Okay, and there's also a parameter that's the accept parameter. So where that's supported, it will limit the images, the files to valid images. Okay, so usually GIFs, PNGs, and JPEGs. Okay, and so all the rest is kind of same old, I think. We have another upload field for the JSON here. Okay, and again, I'm kind of overriding the for these. I'm overriding the normal file fields, like you see, like if you see like a normally on a browser when you're uploading a file, like on Canvas, you'll see like a file upload field, and it looks pretty lame. I'm doing some like CSS tricks to get rid of those and replace them with graphical buttons. Okay, so that's what some of this is about. But anyway, this is another file field for uploading that JSON file. Okay, so any questions about the HTML? That should be pretty straightforward, I think. So yours doesn't have to look like mine. The CSS is a little bit trickier. I did some things with Flex. Flex is some new CSS properties, newish, the last few years, that actually Bootstrap 4 is based on. There's great stuff in W3 Schools, but also CSS Tricks is sort of the definitive guide for this stuff. If you're interested in it, you don't have to be, but this is great if you want to know about this stuff. Okay, so if I give you that CSS, you're not in the dark on that. This again, these are some of the CSS tricks I'm playing to get rid of those file buttons. So I'm doing display none. That hides those file buttons so that I can replace them with Bootstrap buttons. And this is what is, I'm using this complex selector. So normally we just have like, we're selecting on a div, but we can do some complex selectors oftentimes now in CSS to allow us to change some properties on things that otherwise we'd have to use JavaScript to access, right? So in this case, I'm accessing the input fields that do not have a placeholder shown that are valid. Okay? So what does that mean? So in this case, I have this one. So this one says Steve Jobs. So the placeholder is in there. But if I type something in and it's not selected, but the placeholder is not selected, and it is valid, it turns green. Okay, so that's what that does. If it's not valid, it turns red. Okay, that's what the next line does. Okay, so that's what this does. This gets rid of there's just a border that appears on the file input field. So that's just to make things look better. This is just a hack, again, to make things look better in this JSON upload. This was off by 2 pixels just randomly when I overrode the Bootstrap button, so I had to move that by 0.2 pixels. Really bizarre. I made the photos look a little better by giving them 100% width and rounding the corners. And then finally, this is how you can alter things outside of Bootstrap for different screen sizes. This is what's called a media query. I don't think I talked about this before, maybe I did. But you give it the size screen that you're working with. So in this case, minimum width 768 pixels, which is like half a screen size. I'm saying anything that's half a screen size or bigger, apply these properties. Okay. So any questions about any of that? Nothing too mind-blowing there. All right. So the JavaScript. All right. Stop me with questions. I get bored with listening to myself talk. So I'm going to collapse these items. So fundamentally, this program is 2 objects. So we're doing object-oriented programming, okay? And object-oriented programming, just to give you a 10,000-foot view, is just the computer, again, doesn't care. To the computer, these are just instructions, and it gets compiled down, and it's just bits and bytes. This is, object-oriented programming is for people, okay? So we are trying to model real-world things, usually, into code. And so we're trying to grab things that have, in this case, we're dealing with a contact, and the contact has various properties. So name, address, phone, email, birthday, photo. But a contact also is going to have some actions that it can perform, and in this case, it can print itself out. Okay, so contact can print its own data out. Okay, so which you could argue maybe it shouldn't be able to do that, but whatever. In this case, it does. And then the address book is another object, and the address book contains an array of contacts. And actually it has 2 arrays of contacts, one for the permanent storage and one for what's in memory. I'll try to circle back on that. And yeah, so let's look at the contacts first. Stop me if you have questions. So in JavaScript, objects do not need to be predefined, kind of like we talked about with variables. It's best practice to do that, but because the typing system is not, it's meant to be more forgiving than something like Java. So it's an object is defined and it's immediately available for use. You don't have to define a class and then use it. So that being said, that's not how we're going to do it. Okay, so we're going to define a class. We're going to define it more like Java does. We're going to define it in this function notation here, and then we're going to. So here we have address book defined, and then we're going to create a new one, and we're going to we're going to use it that way. Okay. So objects, like object-oriented programming, again, is just it has some variables and it has some functions, and they're all just kind of encapsulated into one structure. Okay. So in this case, we have some internal variables, and like my comment here says, underscore variables are often internal variables, so I'm just using that. I'm initializing this based on the parameters that are passed in here. So when we create a new contact, it's just initialized right away with those properties. And then we are creating the object actually right here. Okay, so this is just a function up until this point, right? We don't actually create the object until here. So the object is this. The object is my, and then at the end we return my out to the address book. Okay, gets a little confusing, but it works fine. So here we're actually creating name, address, phone, email, birth date, photo here, and we're using these properties as our object. Okay. And then we're attaching these functions to my. So here we have my print photo, and here we have a function that we're attaching. Okay, and this just prints out the photo, and print photo is just called from print contact, and print contact just returns a string that gets called from address book. And then other than that, we just have what are called getter and setter function methods, and I have one for each of the properties. So for name, address, phone, email, birth date, photo. You wouldn't necessarily have to have those unless you're actually getting and setting those. So these could definitely go away if you didn't need to have them. So if you're used to Java and you have like private properties, depends on how you want to have things accessed, right? But these are all there if you needed to use them, right? So that's just demonstrating like how it could work. So there's a lot more code here than is actually ever going to be used. Okay, so that is that. Any questions about contact? I zipped through that kind of fast, but that one's pretty easy. So the address book function, the address book object, yeah, and like I said, this is what's returned here. Return is my. Okay, so it returns my at the end here. All right, so address book, we initialize 2 arrays, and arrays are just variables that have like a list of items attached. Okay, and that's denoted with the square brackets. So I have the memory contacts and the permanent contacts. So we just have an array of contacts, okay, for each of those. Then I also have a variable that's just used to hold the newest contact photo. So again, we're creating the object here. We have getter and setter methods for those items. And then this is where we actually have the functions that do some of the work. Okay, so clearing the local contacts just sets the arrays to blank again. Write local storage, this is one I'll just give you because there's really just one way to do this, so there's no reason for you to memorize this. JSON stringify permanent contacts. Okay, so we have our permanent contacts array, and we're just we're going to store it as an item called permanent contacts in our permanent storage in our web browser. Okay, so that's all it does. And we wrap it in this try catch conditional type of structure, so that what that does is if it errors out, so it tries this, and if it breaks, it gives us an opportunity to pass the error back to the program and do something about it. Okay, so we know what went wrong. Okay, read local storage, kind of similar, where it's the inverse. So we have JSON stringify to put it out to the local storage set item. Here we have local storage get item, and then we JSON parse it back into permanent contacts. So we just do the inverse. Okay, and again we just try catch. So if the item wouldn't exist or something. Okay, does that make sense? And I'll give you that code, but hopefully that sort of makes sense. All right, so I have a whole, so again, you don't have to just use regular expressions. In terms of like validating your input data, the birth date, I'm showing how one method you could use to validate the birth date. Okay, you could use a similar thing to validate an address. I'm splitting the string, so I'm passing in this birth date string, the original string, and if it's not undefined, so if there's actually a string passed in, I'm using the split method. So I'm splitting on the slash. So if I pass in 01/01/2018, the month is going to be 01, the day is 01, the year is 2018. So split birth date sub 0, sub 1, sub 2. That's how you access those. Okay. And so then I'm determining, is it a leap year? I'm using the mod notation, so I'm saying year mod 4 and testing against that, and then I'm also testing year mod 400, which is the other way you can have a leap year. And I'm also setting up some lists of which months have 31 days and which months have 30, so I'm checking those things. So if you have, if you say February 31st, it will error that out. Okay, so I'm checking against those things. Okay. Then we have add contact. So that's called when I click the add contact button. And again, I'm just, this is getting the actual field, like the button. This is getting the button, and then this is getting the value of the button. Not to be too confusing, but that keeps us under that 80 character limit. So this is the line for 80 characters. And then here's some more regular expressions. So we can do some regular expression testing down below. That's with this test right here. We can do some testing that way. I can also call the isBirthdayBad function that I have above. So when I add a contact, I can test each of these fields to see if they're okay. And then if everything's okay, so I go all the way down here. If it's a valid contact, then I can say, okay, let's create a new contact. Let's create a new contact object by calling the contact function, passing those values in, and then let's get that new contact object that we created, and let's push it onto the contact array that we have in memory and the permanent contacts that we have to push into the permanent storage. And then we'll write it to local storage right away. And then we will, this is the if you remember, I had the form element in the HTML. I can call the reset function to wipe out all the things in the forms by calling this. Okay, yeah?
Can you explain what the pushing does exactly again?
I sure can, yeah. So, let's see. So, if we have an array, so in this case I have var cars equals Saab, Volvo, BMW. If I wanted to push an item onto the array, so that if I pushed Ford onto here, I'd have Saab, Volvo, BMW, Ford. That's all push does. It just adds an item onto the end.
So only arrays and nothing else, really?
Yeah, I mean, that's, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Not to be too complicated, because like in JavaScript, arrays kind of are objects. So yes and no. But yeah, I mean, really it's push is just for an array.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. That is a good question. Anything else that I can kind of circle back on? That was an awesome question. Okay, cool. All right, so display address book. Again, we have that array. So if you guys have heard of for loops before in Java or other languages, the guy that writes JSLint actually urges against using regular for loops. So so a for loop is like we do something like for int x equals 0, x is less than 10, x plus plus. So you guys maybe have seen something like this. Let's see, we'll just go console log x, right? So we could do something like this in a loop. This is called a loop, right? But the reason that we're not going to use like a for loop like this, I'm going to use a for each, is because like we don't know what number this is. We don't know how many items we have. So since we'd have to go find out how many items we have anyway in order to create a loop with this structure, why not just have the array, which has a for each method, why not just have the array do it itself? Like in JavaScript, we have a better way to do it, okay? So we have this built-in for each method, which takes the place of that for loop, okay? So that's what that does. So contact is X in that context, okay? So for each of the contacts that are in mem contacts, then just call contact.print contact and add that output to the to display, and then once that's all done, then we just add it to the web page. Okay. And the other stuff we're just checking to make sure that the array actually exists. Okay. Any questions about that? All right, cool. All right, so then again, we're checking to see if mem contacts exists, and if it does, then we are going to create just a string of that, and this is so we can. This is the download JSON function. So if we hit that download button, we're creating a file that we can download, like just a packaged up text file that we can download, and that's what this is all doing. Okay, so. And again, I'll give you this because there's really, this is what it is. There's not really very many variations on this. Okay, so the one item that I should call out though, if you're going to change things, there's this built-in blob object that gets called that allows this to work. That needs to be added up here for JSLint in order for that to work. Okay. So, all right, so this, I just created a little shortcut function for my confirmations, so I could just pass it what type of confirmation message it is. The rest was kind of boilerplate, so just to keep from duplicating code. So like right here, I called confirmation message delete. So this is the delete address book. Ultimately, the actual deletion is this. Okay. And then after I delete it, though, after we delete it, we want to redisplay it. So after I delete it, we want to display on the screen so that what the user sees actually reflects what's in memory. Okay, so we wipe out what's in memory, but then we clear the screen too. Okay. And if there's nothing there, we say, hey, there's nothing there, so nothing to delete. So when we hit the file upload field, the thing of note here is we're grabbing the very first file. Okay. We're checking, and I'm checking to make sure it's a JPEG. So this is some complicated logic here to do that. Oh, this might be my issue. I think some of these might not be built-in functions, so I might have to fix that. That might be my problem. So I have a problem with my code where it wasn't working. This could be it. So this might get a little more complicated. But anyway, so I'm checking to make sure it's not that it is a JPEG, and then once it is, then we read the file in. We read the image in. Okay. And finally, we populate the address book. So this is what happens when we first run the program. We populate the address book with what's in permanent storage. Okay, so if we actually have anything in permanent storage, when we open up the page, it for eaches through each of the permanent contacts, and it'll put those into the memory contacts, and that's what displays on the page. Okay. Finally, this is the last thing. The upload JSON takes that text file that we download and gives us a confirmation message. Are you sure you want to replace it? It clears out what's in memory already. It grabs that first file, and then it reads it in. It loads it into permanent contacts, writes local storage, populates it, which puts it into the memory storage, and then redisplays it, and then clears out the JSON field. And then this is the stuff this is where those things actually get called. So clear local contact, read local storage, populate, display. So these things actually get called, and these are the things that listen. So all the click handlers, and we don't have to just have click handlers. We have change handlers for the file uploaders. So the file uploaders they're change. They're not just click. So if the file that's selected changes, then we do something different. Okay. So, any questions about any of that? I know I went really fast, but. So, should I run to Starbucks for everybody?
Yeah, please.
Was that too boring? I'm sorry. That's why I waffled. I was like, well, maybe we should do a game instead. But there's a lot of cool stuff in here. So, so there are a number of these functions I'm for sure going to give you. But there are some of them I want you guys to be able to like reason through yourselves, and you're gonna put your own forms in there. So the important pieces of here that you are gonna have to for sure do yourselves are you're gonna have to add the form fields. You're gonna have to do some validation of the input, and of course make it all work. Right? You're gonna have to get all the pieces to work together. But I'll give you the JSON download functions. I'll give you the upload JSON function, the permanent storage functions. Okay, so you won't have to like figure all that out. I'll give you those functions to use, but you're gonna have to put the pieces together and make those things work. Okay, so good. Awesome, maybe. I don't know. Nobody's thrilled, but nobody's screaming in pain, so I don't know. Like, I don't know how to gauge that.